Hey everyone, welcome back to our Catechists in Quarantine formation series. This is our fourth installment. We're continuing on with Augustine and finishing off his 6 points on how to remain cheerful in our catechism. It's a letter that he wrote to the deacon in Carthage who was asking him about how to be a better catechist, and around the year 400 AD. So Augustine has these timeless pieces of advice, and he identifies 6 things that we need to be on our guard against that could remove our joyfulness, our cheerfulness from us when we're teaching. So we're going to talk about his 5th and his 6th points today. Now, Augustine's 5th point is that we might just wake up on Sunday morning and not want to catechize. Like, there's just other things that we would rather be doing, and that could take away our motivation. So he says, well, we should recognize if that hits us, whether it's laziness or it's that we really think our time could be better spent doing something else, is that if we have already said yes to catechize at a certain time, and we've come to that time where now it's time to catechize, or if someone is right in front of us asking for us to teach them about the faith, it's more likely than not to be God's will that we do that, and we follow through on the catechizing, rather than it be God's will that we do something other than that in that moment, most likely. So the first point that I want to draw out here is faithfulness. Since we've said yes at the beginning of the year to catechizing in our classrooms every Sunday morning for the whole school year, that's something that we really just, in one part, we just need to be faithful to. So that takes some effort, and it's tough because a lot of times it's not satisfying. We don't feel the satisfaction every single time we wake up Sunday morning knowing we're going to go do this. That would be a grace, certainly, if one of us always felt that motivation every time. So the first part about faithfulness is just putting in our effort. The second part, though, is that we can recognize that God actually doesn't call us to be anything more than faithful. So we just need to put in the effort, but he actually doesn't expect anything really more than that. That's what he really likes to work with, is just the simple fact that we show up. When I was being formed for becoming a missionary, in the charism of the religious, the missionary community that I went on mission with, is Heart's Home, they taught me that the most important part of your prayer life is showing up. We had a pretty intense rhythm of prayer, different times every day, and sometimes scheduled, other times not, but for different time periods. And they taught me that 90% of your prayer life is just the fact that you're in the chapel doing the prayer at the time that you're supposed to be there doing the prayer. And that the other 10% is whatever God makes of it. So that's us doing our part. And that's a really small act. It doesn't demand much of us. And it is hard, though, because it's not always very satisfying. We want to feel very enlightened in prayer. We want to feel motivated. We want to feel like we're in touch with God. But sometimes God acts in ways that we don't notice. And he doesn't depend upon our motivation. The fact that we're there is what's important on our part. When I was in Ecuador, we had a friend. Her name was Senora Natalia, so like Natalie. And she was a really poor mother. She had 3 kids. And her husband actually was very abusive and got pulled out of the home situation in such a way that basically the family was left without anybody making an income. And they were being supported a little by the state, but it was still very difficult. And we tried to help them as much as we could, our missionary community. And we would go on visits to them, and sometimes we'd try to help the mother find a job, cooking or being a housemaid in someone's household that had some money that could pay for that. But really what we did is we just showed up at her house, and she was always so happy to see us. She never expected anything from us. She never expected, even when we showed up for her birthday or one of her kids' birthdays, she never asked, all right, where's the gift now? Like, where's the cake? Did you bring that? She was always just, busying herself looking for seats to make sure we had a place to sit, always so happy to hear how we're doing, and just delighted that we were there. That really taught me a lot about just the power of being faithful in the small actions. This is something we learned from Mary, too. Imagine Mary's life before the angel Gabriel came and announced that she was going to be the mother of God. We know from history that she was one of the young women brought up in a temple, serving the priests there. So serving the priests in their daily prayers and their daily liturgies. And that she also would have led a life probably largely of contemplation and prayer. So we can imagine that right as the angel is showing up, to bring about the Annunciation, she's just in the middle of one of those routines. And maybe it's somewhat monotonous. A lot of times in these images of the Annunciation, we see the angel arriving, and Mary is either kneeling, or she has the Bible or some other prayer book. We get this idea that she had been in the middle of prayer, which for her was most likely a routine thing. And, how could she have expected that right then, that day, during that act of prayer, this incredible announcement was going to arrive? So if we have that kind of confidence in our small yeses, just staying faithful to the things that we've said yes to, that gives us a certain lightness and a certain sense of humor and joy I think Augustine wants us to retain as catechists. So who knows if today, by me showing up to this lesson Sunday morning, one of the kids in my class is going to have their faith, turned on like never before, or they're going to learn something about God that's going to set them on fire, and that's going to be a seed that will bear fruit later in life, and we'll never know. We got to have that kind of confidence and that joy. Now, Augustine, when he's talking about this problem of wanting to do something else rather than catechizing, it's because catechizing for him was largely a walk-in kind of affair. He was the bishop of a big city in North Africa, and the city of Hippo. So I imagine, he's in the chancery, kind of the bishop's office, and people would come onto his door and tell the clergy member, the deacons, the priests who are helping the bishop out. They would let them hey, can you tell Bishop Augustine that we want to become Christians? So Augustine would just get this call from one of his assistants saying, hey, you've got some people at the door that want to be catechized. That was part of his life. So the second point I want to draw from what Augustine says, in addition to faithfulness, is what Augustine goes on to say is a type of humility, which is when, the humility that makes us recognize that God's will is more important than our own. And a humility, to be open to that happening, to having our will be changed. Augustine could be sitting down to write his homily that he's going to deliver at the cathedral of this big city the next day for who knows how many people, something pretty important for his ministry. But a group of travelers come by and say, we want to become Christians. Can you teach us? And he might think time is better spent writing his homily, but he has this line. He says in his letter, if anything unavoidable happens, we should bend ourselves to it, lest we be broken. He sees in the way that God brings things before us in our reality, in our day-to-day lives, a phone call or a person that we meet on the street or some problem we have to confront, is that these are things that are unavoidable, some of them. They have that character about them that it's God's will, and it's humility for us to bend to them, to let those things influence us and affect our lives, so that we change our schedule, we adapt. And that builds this humility that recognizes that God's will is more important than our own. Something I also learned on mission, this is from the priest who was the director of the entire missionary community. He would always say that holiness is availability. And what he meant by that is the extent to which we are able to drop our plans in a moment or suspend them and entertain, or be open to changing them to accommodate some other person or to love somebody who is right in front of us, to think about their needs, is the extent to which we are holy and close to God, and the extent to which God can work in us. So he was a big champion of this. Don't get too set in your plans. Make good plans, and those are important, but be available to the working of the Spirit and almost expect it, Be like Mary would have been, let's say, right before the angel arrived to announce that she would bear Jesus as her son. Is that any moment now, God could put something in front of me that would demand of me an act of love, and I'm excited, I'm ready for it, I'm going to follow my plans, as I made them because they're good, but I'm almost expecting that there's going to be an interruption. That's sort of what Augustine is going after here. So I think of that for us as a call to be flexible in our classes. So in our lesson plans, we should do everything we can to make a good lesson plan and follow it to the best we can. But when we're actually doing the lesson, we should always have an eye towards how the students are reacting, how the kids are. If it's obvious to us that this last point in our set of points for the lesson is they're already bored, they're not going to be hearing it, we need to move on to the game first, but that we had originally planned for after, we should be flexible to that and always be aware that that's a certain type of humility, to drop our ideas about what might seem best first. Now, Augustine's sixth point is really interesting here. It's pretty deeper on a personal level, but it gets to us spiritually. It might happen that one of us, any of us one day, might feel unworthy of being a catechist because of sin. We feel guilty. We feel ashamed. We don't feel like we ought to be in front of kids talking about God and the faith and our church, knowing that, I don't know, maybe we're so unfaithful in our family relationships, or we're so, we're perpetual liars, or we can only see our own faults, and so we're ashamed. We're ashamed of being in front of the kids. And this is a serious thing. I don't want to laugh about it. This is something I've felt this before, and I'm sure many of you have as well. And what Augustine says here is not to just stuff that down and forget about it and say, okay, I'm just going to bulldoze through this and just catechize anyway and just not think about the state of my soul and how much that might cause me to feel guilty. He has this line. He says, like water quenches fire, so alms quench sin. Alms being an act of mercy or a work of charity. And so his example for this work of mercy, or this alms giving that we could do, is showing up and catechizing. Again, it's this showing up. He says, what better opportunity to atone for our sins than to go before people who have this desire to learn about the faith and to teach them? That's such a pleasing work in the eyes of God. What better opportunity is there to feel better about our sins, to atone for them? The shame we feel should drive us to want to seek out a great act of mercy to do. And this plays a lot into a kind of, depression that we can fall into, any of us at different degrees, that makes us think that there's nothing good or worth doing outside of ourselves. We get stuck in our heads. Now, I can't really think of many better ways than being in front of a bunch of kids, especially the younger the better in a sense, to cheer us up and to cure us of that thought that there's nothing worth doing outside of our heads. I feel like kids have this natural playfulness that just cuts right through all of that stuff that we can put in our heads that block us from wanting to do God's work. During the mission, I had some periods of time when I'd be pretty unmotivated, not seeing the point in keeping going with the daily routine. And I was at a point of just not really feeling like I wanted to do anything in particular, but I had some time and I didn't know what to do when our house phone rang. And it was one of our friends, this 30-year-old young man who has a disability, a mental disability, and so his brain is like the brain of a 5-year-old, which means he has this really innocent playfulness, just like 5-year-olds do, and this pure delight in talking to a friend, especially having a friend visit, and he wanted to talk to me. So it was like, wow, that's incredible. Just hearing the way he said my name, David, instantly made me feel better. And after that phone call, I knew exactly what I should do, and I was motivated again. It was just a light of grace. So I think the kids in our classes can be that for us too, if we're open to it. Now I want to leave you just with this one prayer that I learned when I did a catechist program in college. It was one of the priests, one of my mentors, taught me this, and it always has helped me. A very simple prayer in a time when I feel shameful or that I feel like I can't pray or that I'm not worthy. It's just 3 lines. He says, pray these words: I can't, you can, you promised. So we just let ourselves be there before God and say those three things. I can't, you can, you promised. And that's one of the best prayers to make in 10 seconds. And that really has helped in times of not feeling worthy to do what I feel that God has put in front of me. Well, there we have it. There's Augustine on keeping up cheerfulness in our catechism. So please leave your comments below, asking questions, and especially recommending what next topics you guys would like to hear about. But if not, we'll tune in again next week with the rest of our Catechism in Quarantine series. All right, take care, guys. God bless.